He's not done yet. President Joseph Kabila hints of a political future after the elections in the DRC. Tension mounts in Somalia as a motion is filed to impeach President Mohamed Abdullahi Farmajo. And it's crunch time for the UK Prime Minister ahead of a parliamentary vote on the controversial Brexit deal. You're watching Africa Live. A warm welcome. I am Peninah Karibe. Also coming up this hour. Egypt's President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi champions African trade and investment. And in sports, we tell you about the historic Copa Libertadores final. The President of the Democratic Republic of Congo, Joseph Kabila, plans to stay in politics when he steps down after the December elections. Kabila says he hasn't ruled out running again for the presidency in 2023. Kabila was due to step down in 2016 at the end of his constitutional mandate. However, the election to replace him has been delayed repeatedly, and until recently, it was unclear if he would seek a third term. Instead, Kabila has handpicked Emmanuel Ramazani Shadary as his preferred candidate for the December polls. The long-delayed vote will mark the DRC's first democratic transfer of power and end Kabila's 17-year rule. He will, however, be eligible to run for office again in 2023.
What will be my role after I step down? My role will be to make sure that we don't go back to square one. Square one meaning where we found the Congo 22 years ago. My role will be to do that by advising, by giving all the necessary information, advice to be taken or not taken. In life, in fact, you shouldn't rule out anything, because everything is possible. But the question is, what's the bigger picture? It's not just a matter of running in 2023 or 2024 or whatever. No, I don't think so. So in life, as in politics, I don't rule out anything.
Meanwhile, the European Union has prolonged sanctions against Congolese President Joseph Kabila's chosen successor just 2 weeks before a historic election. EU officials confirmed that travel bans and asset freezes will be renewed against the ruling party candidate Emmanuel Ramazani Shadary and 15 other people. The move is expected to be adopted without debate at a meeting of EU foreign ministers on Monday. Shadary was sanctioned by the EU last year for obstructing DRC's electoral process and a crackdown against protesters angry over delayed polls. The election is scheduled for December 23rd. It could be Congo's first peaceful democratic transfer of power. This year's Nobel Peace Prize winners have called for justice for the victims of sexual violence in conflicts around the world, a day before they will receive the award for their efforts to put an end to rape as a weapon of war. Denis Mukwege, a doctor who helps victims of sexual violence in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Nadia Murad, a Yazidi rights activist and survivor of sexual slavery by Islamic State, will jointly receive the 2018 Nobel Peace Prize at a ceremony on Monday in Norway. Mukwege heads the Hospital in the eastern Congo city of Bukavu. Murad is an advocate for the Yazidi minority in Iraq and for refugee and women's rights in general.
We want an end to this tyranny and justice to prevail. Those who inflicted this tyranny on us have never been held accountable, not even the ones before Daesh came. Until now, no Daesh members were put on trial, and we have never seen justice being done. If justice doesn't prevail, new groups will emerge, and once again they will oppress us.
I believe there's an international humanitarian law. We are here today to demand that it's only applied in a humanitarian way. It has to be impartial. For me, it's very, very important to throw light on the violence that women suffer in conflict zones, because it can't be a question of not acting because we did not know. I think that this prize will certainly bring the international community face to face with its responsibilities regarding women and children in conflict zones. We hope that our presence here does not mean that this prize is considered a victory in itself, but rather it's seen as a start to fight back against an evil which is gnawing away at our society, the violence done to women in war.
Over 150 UN members will adopt the Global Compact for Migration at a conference in Morocco. Special representative of the UN Secretary-General for International Migration, Louise Arbour, says the compact will not take away nation sovereignty but will protect human rights. The UN has also expressed disappointment after several nations pulled out.
This compact is not a compact for migration. It's a compact for safe, orderly, and regular migration. The compact's essential strength is that it is cooperative, not binding. As a document, it is not a legally binding document, but it has at its core a willingness for member states to cooperate with each other. A few states have indicated that they will not adopt the compact. A smaller number have said that their final decision must await further internal deliberations. It is regrettable whenever any state withdraws from a multilateral process on a global issue, the outcome of which has generated overwhelming support. It's particularly regrettable when a state pulls out from a negotiated agreement in which it actually actively participated a very short time before.
Let's head to Marrakesh now, where the adoption of the Global Compact on Migration is taking place. We get the latest with CGTN's Jane Kale. She's live for us there in Marrakesh. Jane, the conference has officially opened. What has the UN chief said about member states who are not party to this compact?
Well, Peninah, he did acknowledge the absence of these countries. There are about 80 countries that are not represented at the summit here in Morocco. And Secretary General Antonio Guterres did say in his own words that he hopes, he can only hope that these countries will actually see the value of this compact on their societies and eventually join the rest of the world in this very important venture. That's what the Secretary General did say. And of course, the UN has been saying that this compact is important to at least to help in demystifying the migration itself and encouraging cooperation between countries, because as you know, this is a global phenomena that almost every country around the world is affected. Remember, the UN has said there are about 258 million international migrants around the world. So this is something that the world is grappling with at the moment, and it's not about to go away anytime soon. Peninah?
So, Jen, the UN Compact has 23 pillars that were agreed upon by member states, but we saw a change of heart by several European member states who will not adopt this compact. What is at the heart of their resistance to this compact?
Well, Peninah, the reasons are quite unique for the countries for each and every country that has actually pulled out. But perhaps a majority of these countries, one of the reasons that's been highlighted and keeps popping out is the fact that they are saying that the compact agreement appears to be pro-migration. It is encouraging migration. And this has to do with the 23 objectives that have been highlighted, which are basically guidelines in the implementation of this agreement. And of course, they include things like the basic ensuring that the migrants have access to basic services. It also talks about providing opportunities and empowering these migrants in terms of even ensuring that they have the necessary skills, ensuring they have proof of identity, plus also encouraging countries to work on their structures, to work on their borders, to ensure there's an easy flow of migrants. Now, countries like the US, which was actually the first country to pull out of the deal in 2017, that was last year, did say that it was disagreeing with this agreement because it says that it was inconsistent with the US's immigration policies, even though the compact and the UN says that each and every country has a sovereign right to determine how how the implementation of this compact agreement. Of course, experts have raised concerns with the fact that these big countries, the strong allies, are not in this deal, and we are talking about countries like the US, Australia, Belgium, which is practically divided over the issue, Israel. They say there may be an impact in the long run, especially in the effectiveness of this agreement. And what we may see in future is that more and more countries may perhaps still not implement the deal or end up pulling out. Peninah?
And Jen, we've also learned that African migrants account for just a small percentage of people trying to get to Europe. Talk to us more about that issue of the African migrants.
Well, Peninah, it's interesting because the narrative widely perpetuated, especially where Africans are concerned, is that they are desperate to actually cross into Europe and the West. And yet, in actual fact, a majority of migration, or rather migration in Africa, is intracontinental, meaning it's happening well within the continent. And to help us understand more about the migration trends, especially here in Africa, we are joined by Fatia Alwan, who is with IGAD, the Immigration Department. Fatu, Africans have really overwhelmingly backed this accord or this compact agreement. Why is it? What is it? What is the need for Africans?
Thank you. I think for Africa, this framework is actually providing an opportunity for all Africans actually, and also for our member state to open more their borders and doors to our migrants. We should also not forget that Africa, one also of the objective is actually to achieve the regional integration agenda. And this is why also coming from the IGAD member state, where also our country is a countries of origin, transit and countries, we have always tried to find a with the continental one. And this is one also why also our countries are also embarked on how we can also work on the protocol of free movement of people, where also our citizen can also freely move, and also this also framework can also provide more opportunity to our youths, that we should not forget also our most of the time actually crossing the Mediterranean and dying in the sea. And we hope actually, particularly for our region and our continent, how actually our member state can also provide and some like basic social services, also access to their labor market. And this is how we found and we think that this framework.
But the fact that it's not legally binding, it's non-binding. Perhaps one weakness would be implementation, given that there won't be monitoring and review mechanisms. How will we ensure that actually countries that have actually signed up and endorsed this live up to the pledge, even in line with the 23 guidelines?
Yeah, thank you. Of course, buying countries have a strong political commitment to implement this. We also in the process to establish a robust and monitoring actually to trace, to track the implementation and how countries also will be implementing this framework. What is also the most important is the countries to have the proper structure, and even at regional level in the implementation of this framework. And I think we are all in line, given that our region and also in the continent we have a structure, a strong structure to implement any political commitment which is also in favor of our citizens. I think we are hopeful that this framework will already support the existing instrument that we have at the continental level, which is called the African Migration Policy Framework. So at our regional level, it's called the framework.
And perhaps the last question: what is IGAD doing to change this to change the narrative that Africans are desperate to cross maybe the Mediterranean or to get to Europe, because that's what has been highlighted in recent years, and that's what we keep seeing. And yet what we are learning is that migration is within the continent.
Sure, migration is within the continent. We should not forget that 80% of the people who are migrating remain within the continent. Maybe it's only 20 who are crossing actually the Mediterranean or the seas. And this is why our member state, we have the responsibility actually to work together and also give an opportunity and chance and employment for our youth who are most of the time desperately. But I think this is one of the reasons actually we are embracing this framework, which is also supporting already our regional instrument.
All right, thank you very much, Fatia. So that brings us to the end of this session, so to speak. So there's going to be a general debate that's going to be happening. One of the leaders who's going to be addressing that meeting is German Chancellor Angela Merkel, who's already here in Morocco. Peninah.
All right, Jane, thank you very much. Jane Keo live for us there in Marrakesh. Now, on migration still, and Somalia is trying to repatriate thousands of migrants stuck in detention centers in Libya. The process is slow but welcome, say those who've returned home already. CGTN's Abdulaziz Bilu has more.
In 2016, Ahmed Abdrazak left home, determined to reach Europe. His journey started here at the port city of Bosaso in northeastern Somalia. Due to its proximity to Yemen, human traffickers use Bosaso to smuggle illegal immigrants, mainly Somalis and Ethiopians, to oil-rich Gulf states. From there, they head to Europe.
The ship docked near Yemen late at night. The smugglers forced us overboard into the sea so they could avoid being detected. We had to swim to safety. We all survived, but we had nothing to eat or drink.
The International Organization for Migration reports that hundreds of people have died trying to reach Yemen. The Arab world's poorest country is currently battling one of the world's worst humanitarian disasters. Ahmed found another smuggling ring to help him leave the war-torn nation, only to arrive in Libya.
In Libya, smugglers separated men from women. They fed us once a day and beat those who couldn't pay the money they demanded for the journey to Europe.
This video is one of the many that raise the alarm about the conditions under which migrants in Libya are held. Thousands of Somali migrants are believed to be held in various detention centers all across Libya. The government in Mogadishu has managed to repatriate hundreds who have since been reunited with their families. But thousands more are still in Libya, and their fate hangs in the balance.
If there's one thing I have Libya.
Abdulaziz Bilu, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
You're watching Africa Live. Let's take our first break this hour. Coming up. Tension mounts in Somalia as a motion is filed to impeach President Mohamed Abdullahi Farmajo. And it's crunch time for the UK Prime Minister ahead of a parliamentary vote on the controversial Brexit deal.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself. If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice. My home country lies at the foot of Africa, the southernmost tip of our beautiful continent, and the unique point at which two great oceans meet. Now on a clear day in Cape Town, you can just make out Robben Island, the place where Nelson Mandela was jailed for so long. South Africa has changed so much in the years since then, but it is this country's history that shaped me and took me into reporting. I'm inspired by Africa's men and women of courage. It's the everyday hero who brings out my passion. The creatives, the decision makers, the risk takers who are shaping a bright African future. I see them in Cape Town. I see them in the pulsating city of Johannesburg. I see them across the continent, and I know our time has come.
CGTN is a platform where African voices can speak for themselves and take their stories to the world. My name is Lindy Mtongana, and I'm a news anchor and reporter for CGTN.
A top official of Somalia's parliament administration has filed a motion with the Speaker of Parliament to impeach President Mohamed Abdullahi. The president has been accused of secretly signing agreements with other countries, including Ethiopia and Eritrea. The deals touched on the use of Somali ports and economic and security cooperation. Abdullahi is also accused of illegally extraditing alleged criminals to other countries and violating Somalia's federalism law and the rules and regulations of Parliament. According to the Constitution, 92 lawmakers have to sign the motion for it to be submitted to the Speaker. Parliament may then debate the motion a week later. A successful impeachment vote requires the backing of 2/3 of all MPs. French President Emmanuel Macron will address the nation amid calls for him to end the weeks of the Yellow Vest protests in Paris and other cities. The embattled president will be speaking publicly for the first time after 4 weeks of nationwide anti-government demonstrations. Meanwhile, Paris is getting back on its feet again. Cleanup crews are out in the streets and shops have reopened. Police say more than 1,700 were arrested nationwide.
The impact of the Yellow Vest protests is severe. I can't give you an exact evaluation at the moment, but I will do so in the coming days and give evaluations on business revenues and a more global one on the French gross domestic product. But we must expect a new slowdown of economic growth at year-end given the circumstances that just took place. I think it's very bad news for the French economy, very bad news for business owners, very bad news for very small and medium-scale businesses, for artisans, and for all those who counted on their year-end sales to bring in higher revenues and maybe to pay their employees better.
And joining us for more on this is Oliver Whitfield-Miocic, live in Paris. Oliver, the protesters currently lack clear leadership. What sort of challenges does that present for both sides, and is that sustainable?
Well, the main challenge is that without any real leadership, it means that they can't get a concise message across to the government. The Yellow Vest movement at the moment has now mushroomed into this greater gripe at the French government about the cost of living, about how much pensions get paid, about how much money people have at the end of month, about how much people are having to pay for their apartments and the high rates of taxes. And so there's been these 50 demands that have been loosely set out by the Yellow Vest movement. But that makes it very, very difficult for the government to try and address all of those issues at the same time. Really, the French government can only come to like 2 or 3 of those issues. You've already seen the climb down on the fuel tax, which has now been abolished, that planned rise, which we've been expecting on January 1st. The electricity prices and gas prices have been frozen, but that still isn't enough. And so if more and more demands come out, it'll be very difficult for the government to try and meet all of them.
Yeah, but there in France, Oliver, there's growing resentment of Macron. How can he fix that?
It's going to be very, very difficult for him to try and appease the people and to appease those plummeting approval ratings, which is currently at 23%. That means 77% of people in France no longer support him. But out on the streets, the things that we are hearing is that if he were to raise the minimum wage, if he were to lower taxes on certain things, and if he were to try and sort out the cost of living in France, then that would really, really help them. Now, interestingly, there is a potential for the Yellow Vests, or there was a survey carried out, that if the Yellow Vests were to stand for office, they could win as much as 12% of the vote going forward. So it's very, very interesting to see what will happen to politics moving on from this point.
Right. What has been the impact of these protests on business and tourism?
It has been a huge impact to the economy. Just today, the Bank of France has slashed its fourth quarter potentials. The forecast was at 0.4% growth. That has now been slashed to 0.2% growth. We know that the protests are stopping people from going and eating out in restaurants. It's stopping people from going to shops. So we've heard from the Retail Federation only this weekend saying that the cost to retailers has been about 1.1 billion euros as footfall has been severely impeded by these ongoing protests. Now that is something which isn't just limited to retail, it's also had an effect on the movement of goods, the distribution of goods as roads have been blocked, and as well it's also had an impact on some petrol stations with key oil refineries also being blocked. So a huge impact on the economy, which is only adding to the angst for French President Emmanuel Macron to try and find a solution as quickly as possible.
And Oliver, are other politicians or presidential hopefuls seizing the moment to mount pressure on Macron?
Yes, that's right. Not only on the far right with Marine Le Pen, but also on the far left with Jean-Luc Mélenchon. Both of those politicians trying to get some more sway over what is happening. But we do have to be very cautious with how much of an effect this will have, because the Yellow Vest movement aren't just angry at Macron. They're angry at successive governments which have been and gone. They're angry at the political establishment, which they think is an elite, outdated concept that politicians really haven't got a clue. One of the 50 demands that has been released actually is that civil servants should have their pay capped, and it should only increase with the rate of inflation. So if these far right and far left politicians think that they're magically going to sweep up, they've got another thing coming because of this anti-political rhetoric that is coming from the Yellow Vest movement.
All right, Oliver, thank you very much for joining us. Oliver Whitfield-Miocic in Paris. To the UK now, where British MPs are set to vote on Prime Minister Theresa May's Brexit deal, but it's not going to be an easy vote. Senior lawmakers in May's own party have felt pressure on her to go back to Brussels and seek a better offer. CGTN's Tuli Shabalala has more.
British lawmakers are preparing to debate Prime Minister Theresa May's Brexit deal, and it's likely going to be a tough vote.
The vote is going ahead, and that's because it is a good deal. It's the only deal. This has been a hard-fought negotiation over 2 years, with the Prime Minister working day and night to make the case. And the risk for those who say simply go back and ask again, the risk is, well, that isn't necessarily a one-way street. The French, the Spanish and others will turn around if we seek to reopen the negotiation and ask for more.
So far, the odds look stacked against May winning parliamentary approval. If MPs reject her deal, plans for Britain's exit from the European Union would be thrown into turmoil. And May's political future hangs in the balance.
Nothing is over until it's over. And it will be, let me put it this way. If the Prime Minister is able to go back to Brussels this week, and say, I'm afraid that the Irish backstop solution that you have come up with is very unpopular, not just with the country, but also with the House of Commons.
Britain is deeply divided over Brexit. Thousands of protesters staged a demonstration against May's deal on Sunday. Many are calling for a second referendum.
We've moved from a possibility to a probability. You'll have heard this morning, even the Cabinet is now talking about a people's vote as a way out of the mess.
Our message, I think, for Theresa May could not be clearer. We do not want your vision of a mean-minded little Britain with our borders closed and our horizons narrowed.
The British Prime Minister has been struggling to win over critics. Her current agreement proposed keeping close economic ties with the EU when Britain leaves the bloc in March 2019. Tuli Shabalala, CGTN.
An Egyptian lawyer has filed a court case to force Parliament to start a debate on amending the constitution. The clause that is up for debate will be the one that bars President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi from running for a third term in 2022. A court in Cairo will hold its first hearing on the case on December 23rd. Egypt's constitution was adopted in 2014 after Mohamed Morsi was ousted from the presidency. President Sisi was elected president later that year, and this year the incumbent won a second four-year term in office.
The Court of Urgent Affairs is not specialized to look into the presidential terms. The legal measure to extend the presidency is the Constitution. A committee in Parliament must be formed to study the amendment, recommend what should be changed. Parliament must approve a call for the public referendum. It's the people say, it's not a decision of any judge or any court. That's the only legal way through which an extension in presidential terms should be passed.
People are economically suffering. We need something that would make us earn a good income so we can choose him once again. We can't sustain that pressure. I can support an extension to his presidency if it's good for the country. He has restored security, but security is not everything. We need economic return. We don't want all resources to go to the army. Let people do business freely.
Now, the latest developments in the case of the murder of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Saudi Arabia's foreign minister has ruled out the extradition of suspects in the crime. This is after Istanbul's chief prosecutor filed warrants of arrest for two former senior Saudi officials. Turkish authorities have concluded that the two men warrant strong suspicion for their involvement in Khashoggi's killing. Transcripts of an audio recording of the journalist's final moments show that several phone calls were made to give briefings on the crime's progress. Istanbul believes those calls were made to Saudi Al-Qahtani, a top aide to Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, and General Ahmed Al-Asri, who served as deputy head of foreign intelligence. Recapping our top stories, the president of the Democratic Republic of Congo, Joseph Kabila, plans to stay in politics when he steps down after the December elections. Kabila has not ruled out running again for the presidency in 2023. He was due to step down in 2016 at the end of his constitutional mandate. The long-delayed elections will mark Congo's first democratic transfer of power and an end to Kabila's rule that began in 2001. Over 150 UN member states will adopt the Global Compact for Migration in Morocco. In a briefing ahead of the official adoption, Special Representative of the Secretary General for International Migration says the compact will not take away sovereignty of nations, but it will protect human rights. The UN has also expressed disappointment after several nations pulled out of the Global Compact for migrants. A top official of Somalia's parliament administration has filed a motion with the Speaker of Parliament to impeach President Mohamed Abdullahi. The president has been accused of secretly signing agreements with other countries, including Ethiopia and Eritrea. He is also accused of illegally extraditing alleged criminals to other countries and violating Somalia's federalism law and the rules and regulations of Parliament. A successful impeachment vote requires the backing of 2/3 of all MPs. And embattled French President Emmanuel Macron will address the nation amid calls for him to end the weeks of the Yellow Vest protests in Paris and other cities. He will be speaking publicly for the first time after 4 weeks of nationwide anti-government demonstrations. Meanwhile, Paris is getting back on its feet again. Cleanup crews are out on the street and shops have reopened. Police say more than 1,700 were arrested nationwide. And that's a look at our top stories this hour. Coming up in business news, Egypt's President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi champions African trade and investment. And China summons the US and Canadian ambassadors in Beijing over the arrest of Huawei's CFO.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. You've got to get out. Go there and you'll find them. In the bazaars of Casablanca. Among the crowds in Cairo,
who come to visit Cairo, the ancient capital of Egypt.
Along the waters of the Nile, along the sands of the Sahara. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. No one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
The 2018 Africa Forum has kicked off in Egypt's Red Sea resort city of Sharm el-Sheikh. A number of countries from the Common Market for Eastern and Southern Africa, COMESA, are in attendance. CGTN's Yasser Hakim has more.
The second day of the Africa Forum 2018 saw the presence of several African heads of states. Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi delivered the opening speech at the presidential panel.
Our meeting this year comes at a time we are all looking forward to achieve more regional integration and facilitating intertrade, especially after the AU launched the Continental Free Trade Agreement during the summit in Nouakchott in March 2018.
The top officials focused in their speeches on the importance of promoting African trade and investments.
All African countries have one destiny and one goal. Therefore, they know very well that cooperation in trade and investment is very important. We have a population of 1.2 billion on the continent. There is huge potential for trade and investment that will transform African economies.
The leaders acknowledged there should be more government efforts to facilitate business.
Inter-Africa trade is only 11-12% of overall Africa trade. That needs to increase. If you look at the European Union, it's 60%. So this new Continental Free Trade Agreement that was signed early this year under the auspices of the African Union, I think will go a very, very long ways to us creating this inter-Africa, let's work together, not just the Pan-Africanism of the old days when African countries were going through the liberation front. Now it's economic liberation that we need.
And numbers speak for themselves. In 2017, 6 out of the 10 fastest growing economies worldwide were African, while growth rates in Africa are at an average 3.5 to 4% in spite of the international economic recession. And the delegations at the forum say the two main issues discussed here are improving infrastructure and the transfer of capital to reach African comprehensive integration. The Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi will become the next African Union chairperson starting 2019. And through the Africa 2018 Forum here in Sharm el-Sheikh, he's sending a message to the continent that he's going to be an active head of the African Union. Yasser Hakim for CGTN, Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt.
On to Sudan now. Airfares in the country hit a skyrocket this week. This comes after aviation authorities ordered airlines to price tickets in line with the new exchange rate. The rate has sharply lowered the value of local currency. Under the exchange regime introduced in October, the Sudanese pound devalued to 47.5 per US dollar from 29 pounds per US dollar previously. This has led to a surge in the cost of many goods and services. Despite October's devaluation, the pound still remains under pressure. The Tunisian Consumer Defense Association has issued a warning over the alarming levels of inflation in the country. Purchasing power of at least 9 million people has plunged in the North African state. CGTN's Adel Shawashi reports.
The National Institute of Statistics reports that inflation stabilized at 7.4% for the third consecutive month in November.
This stability is mainly due to unchanging price increases for most consumer products, except foodstuff, where the rate of increase has slowed from 6.3% to 6% year-on-year.
Analysts say the increase in food prices is slowing due to the stability in the cost of meat and edible oils compared with last year's sharp rise.
Core inflation is 7.9% and the consumer price index rose 0.7% in November after a 1.1% increase in October and 0.5% in September.
The Consumer Defense Organization has reported record increases in the prices of the majority of consumer goods over the past 8 years. Tunisians have bemoaned their low purchasing power, which hits the poor particularly hard. Many locals say their living conditions have deteriorated this year.
It's unacceptable that we have to pay more for the same products. Inflation has stabilized, but what about the future? It's uncertain.
The average salary of a civil servant or even a private sector employee does not cover basic monthly expenses. Each month, I borrow money just to survive.
The Tunisian Organization for Consumer Information has called for a public boycott on a number of highly priced goods. Activists argue that it's the only way to rebalance the cost of living. Adnan Shibashi, CGTN, Tunis.
China's foreign ministry has summoned the US and Canadian ambassadors in Beijing to explain the detention of a senior Huawei executive. The tech giant's chief financial officer, Meng Wanzhou, was arrested on the 1st of December, as CGTN's Toby Muse reports.
China summoned the US ambassador in Beijing Sunday to complain about its extradition warrant for the chief financial officer of telecommunications giant Huawei. Vice Foreign Minister La Yucheng told Ambassador Terry Branstad that the executive's legal rights had been violated and demanded the extradition warrant be withdrawn immediately. The warrant led Canada to arrest Meng Wanzhou earlier this month. She is accused of fraud related to alleged US sanctions violations on trade with Iran, and faces a bail hearing before Canada decides on the extradition request.
Let me say first.
Meanwhile, in a series of television appearances, US officials insisted that Meng's detention should not interfere with trade talks between Beijing and Washington.
It's my view that it shouldn't really have much of an impact. I can understand from the Chinese perspective how they would see it that way. This is a criminal justice matter.
White House economic advisor Larry Kudlow pressed during another interview on whether Meng could become a bargaining chip as the US and China hold talks to end their trade war, made no promises.
Can you guarantee me that as part of this negotiation, the president, the administration will not let her go?
Chris, I can't guarantee anything. As I say, this is a DOJ, NSC law enforcement issue. I don't know how it's going to turn out.
The US and China are trying to hammer out a deal before the end of a 90-day truce in order to avoid a range of additional tariffs on imports. Meanwhile, the Canadian province of British Columbia cancelled a trade mission to China because of Meng's detention. This comes after China warned that Canada could face consequences if Meng isn't released. Toby Muse, CGTN, Washington.
You're watching Africa Live. Still ahead. Cartoonists converge in Brazzaville to celebrate graphic design and digital art.
Join us in global business and see Africa through our eyes.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Peninah, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
An international cartoon festival has concluded in the Congolese capital, Brazzaville. The event not only aims to promote Congolese and international graphic artists, it also celebrates creativity, cartoons, digital art and video games.
It was a festival that brought together several artists, including decorators and designers. Under the theme Graphic Mixings, the festival involved book signings, video games, varnishing exhibitions and film screenings.
Generally, people mix up cartoons and drawing. One man can be a draftsman without necessarily being an author of a cartoon. One can be an illustrator, a painter, a graphic designer. But cartoons interest me a lot because I love to direct characters around a story told in a coherent way. What interests me is to tell the subjects that fascinate me and also to live the characters that have no real physical consistency.
I decorate shoes and other objects. I started when I was very young. I had problems with worn-out shoes, so instead of throwing them in the garbage, I gave them a new life. My designs pleased people.
This year, the event also attracted many foreign visitors who came to celebrate African art.
What struck me the most is seeing African talent that is a little rare at the international level. During these 4 days, they have had at least the opportunity to put forward all their knowledge.
Since the launch of the festival in 2015, the Congo art and design field has witnessed tremendous growth. The founders of the festival seek to extend this event beyond the West African region. Ucheo Koronkwo, CGTN.
If you're a fan of the Pitch Perfect film franchise, then this one's for you. The acapella scene in Uganda is growing in popularity, especially among young people. To promote the musical art form, singers have shown off their skills at a competition in Kampala. Leon Senyange was there.
Not a usual place to do rehearsals. Melodies of Christ are grabbing some last-minute rehearsal time backstage. They are up against 10 other groups in this national a cappella competition. They have to be at their best.
The special thing that we have, there is what we call beatboxing. It's not common in girls, but you'll find that in our group, we are having it. So it is very special and we hope to win this competition.
A cappella is about the voices and the beats, with every group determined to showcase what their hard work has brought and hoping to catch the judges' attention.
They are singing without instruments. It is basically vocal. Everything you're hearing right now is vocal music.
The repertoire of songs included local hits and even some classics.
The competition is aimed at not only promoting the contemporary a cappella genre, but also igniting the passion of music among young people.
Fortune Ibanda sings best in the real group. He wants to pursue a career in music.
I love music, so I think I'll take it longer. I'll fight so hard to take it longer, regardless of the surroundings, because I love it.
Already, a cappella singing is drawing in more music lovers. Several groups are springing up, offering unique sounds.
When you first meet them, you think that they are still young, but with time they go on improving, you know. And when you give them a chance and the stage, they will shock you. They really shock you. So I believe they can go places.
The groups are hoping that winning in the competition could translate to wider success and perhaps even a career in music. But this will take a lot of hard work and vocal dedication. Leon Senyange, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
And coming up in sports.